Welcome to the Genre Hustle, your sci-fi fantasy virtual writers group. I'm Anton.
I'm Chris.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Carter.
And I'm AP.
And today's topic is dialogue, and it's my turn. So I turned in my story, which is The Secret in the Ice, which is a story about Dawn, a fantasy writer who is on a downward spiral, who is kidnapped by a vampire who thinks that Dawn is the key to waking a frozen dragon. So Carter, you volunteered to read my submission for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I was drafted to read your submission.
He was volunteered.
Yeah. Okay, so The Secret in the Ice by Anton. So this is a scene between Don, who is the writer, protagonist, and Renato, who is the vampire, also main character. And Renato starts the scene. Come now, Don, why did you think I flew you up here? I don't know, organ harvesting? There's that fertile writer's mind I expected, Renato chuckled. No, sadly nothing so ordinary. Ordinary? Don, what's the one thing you want to see more than anything else in the world? You mean besides my front door? Why do you do what you do? Don sighed. Not only was he going to freeze to death in Greenland, but he was being quizzed by a high school guidance counselor first. I don't know, freedom of expression, independence? Renato shook his head. Think back to when you were a child. The throb behind Don's eyes returned. What did you dream about? Renato continued. What was the thing that excited your imagination? Boobs? Dragons, Don. Dragons.
Good, thanks.
Nice.
No problem.
So this is an effective example of dialogue working pretty well. Don wants to understand why he's there, but he isn't exactly catching on very quickly. And Renato has to hold his hand to get there. It's also doing double, triple duty, which is really what you want your dialogue to be doing for you. Don wants to stay firmly rooted in reality, and Renato has to bend over backwards to get him on board. At the same time, we're getting exposition on Don's history as a writer, and you're showing us Renato's interest and admiration of him. So we understand that he's a good, fairly accomplished writer, but he doesn't have much confidence in himself. So nice work. I think it works really, really well. A great way to create really effective dialogue is something that you're doing here, and it's to have really contrasting characters. Renato is from an entirely different world. Dawn is from the real world, and lots of misunderstandings and jokes come out of that. You get a lot of conflict arising, but at the same time, they have a common interest, so you can see where the friendship is going to arise from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the dialogue is really punchy. I think it's humorous. I think you do, part of why I really like this submission is you do a really good job of having this great back and forth. And I think that's a really important thing to have in dialogue is, good back and forth that isn't held up by a lot of dialogue tags or the reader not knowing who's talking. So there's actually one point where you say, Renato shook his head, think back to when you were a child. You add an action tag. So that's how you know who's talking. It's an action tag without being like, Renato said, think back to when you were a child. Don said. It keeps it moving. It's quick. Like I said before, it's punchy. And that's why I really like it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I noticed it when I was reading it too, is you do a really good job of having kind of a clear delineation, not only in the action while they're talking, but in how they talk. You can tell Renato's kind of diction is a little more, highbrow, and whereas Don sort of comes off as more of an everyman, which I think is what you're going for. So
Yeah, exactly. That goes exactly to what Lucy was saying, which is this idea of voice and tone. Each character you need to be able to separate them.
right, you want them to contrast, but you want them to have the common thing to talk about.
Right, yeah.
One thing that I would mention if you were thinking about taking the scene to the next level is to be careful that you're not answering every question with another question.
Totally,
Has
yes.
someone said that to you already? You have a perfect opportunity when Renato asks Don what the thing he wants to see the most is, and Don answers, what, aside from my front door? It might be interesting to add in something that gives us a little more insight into what's going on in his life. He could say, my wife, I think, or my wife, although I'm not sure it's reciprocated. These are just examples that I'm throwing out to vary the tone slightly
Yeah.
and give us a little tiny bit more insight into who Don
Can
is.
I just, it's funny that you mentioned that one because that actually is the theme. So the theme of this book is about portals. It's about doors. So Dawn they go through a door to get to this mirror, to the mirror land. They seal up doors. They're always going through the doors, and doorways is a big theme. So when I made that joke, that was my my pathetic attempt at trying to go to theme. But
Keep it in there. I love
Yeah.
it, but say something else
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, to Lucy's point, you definitely want to, even in a novel, you know, where you have a lot of space, you want to make sure that every piece of dialogue does something.
Exactly,
You don't
yes.
want to just have a throwaway, hey, how are you doing?
Yes.
You know, you want everything to have at least do something plot-wise or give some information or tone.
Pushing the
or-
story forward,
Or show
exactly,
character,
yeah.
whatever.
Which is something we hammer all the time now, you know, on our 4th episode, is double duty, triple duty. I mean, that's the message that we want to get across. You know, this is your virtual writing group. That's a huge lesson that we've been learning together.
Absolutely. And it's funny because dialogue is one of those places where it's so easy to fall down because you think that it's dialogue, so they're talking, oh, this is where I can give information, this is where I can give exposition. And it's almost, you should be doing the opposite. You should be doing everything you can to elevate the tension, create more contrast, create more drama, more tension at every turn. Yeah.
Yeah, and you need to be deliberate about it. A lot of times what happens to me is when I'm writing a dialogue between two characters or more that I feel like I know somewhat well, I just kind of get lost in it and have them just, you know, sort of have this one-dimensional conversation. Then I go back and read it, and it's like, you know, like the words are fine, but this isn't really doing anything for the story. It doesn't seem to like have a significant place in how the book is unfolding or how the story is unfolding.
Yeah, it's first draft dialogue.
I was
Yeah.
about to say, yeah, that goes exactly to the whole writing is rewriting. So you write the first one to get it out there. What do I need to do in this scene? What's happening? The second pass is it working? Third pass is, is it tight enough? Is it working? Is it doing the things it needs to do?
And asking yourself all those questions. Would this character say this? How would this character say this? Why would he say it? What else would he or she mention?
Right. Have I said this
Yeah.
before? Am I hitting it? Am I hitting the right notes? Yeah.
So I have a different take on a different way to look at dialogue and what makes it good. And I think the heart of any good dialogue is conflict, which you have a lot
Right.
of stuff in this book that is going on there. I brought in an example from Never Let Me Go, which is a novel by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's a great book. And what I want to point out is this section, there's a lot of, the conflict is actually in the subtext. There's a girl and a boy, Tommy, and Tommy's having a fit, and the girl is trying to calm him down. But she talks about everything except that point. So let me just read it. That's when at last Tommy seemed to become aware of me, of the others, of himself, of the fact that he was there in that field, behaving the way he had been, and stared at me a bit stupidly. Tommy, I said quite sternly, there's mud all over your shirt. So what? He mumbled. But even as he said this, he looked down and noticed the brown specks and only just stopped himself crying out in alarm. Then I saw the surprise register on his face that I should know about his feelings for the polo shirt. It's nothing to worry about, I said, before the silence got humiliating for him. It'll come off. If you can't get it off yourself, just take it to Miss Jody. He went on examining the shirt and then said grumpily, it's nothing to do with you anyway. So they're having a conflict about this shirt, but it's not really about the shirt.
Right.
The conflict is in the subtext of the story, and I think that's a really effective way to give realistic dialogue in a book.
Yeah, I really like how it, like when you read it, it comes off as kind of like a one-dimensional slice of life conversation, but obviously every line has something that has deeper significance to the story.
Exactly.
So you kind of get that whole two-sided coin, I guess. And I think like the example that Chris brought up it kind of, goes along with that because people don't speak in subtext all the time in real life. So I think it kind of helps, like it needs to do both. Like it needs to come off like a real conversation between two reasonable characters, or at least believable characters. So to your point, Chris, the example that I brought in for my homework today, I was kind of going for the same thing, this idea of having your characters talking past each other and having the actual meaning of it in the context of the reader's understanding be different from what they're saying, because the characters are kind of failing to understand each other, which is a really effective technique that I think works really well in this example, which is from the big man himself, Haruki Murakami, from his novel 1Q84. And in this scene, one of the protagonists is talking to this religious leader guy who she has gone to assassinate, and he ends up having a lot more information about the world and what's happening than she previously thought. So they're kind of talking to each other in this tense environment. They're alone. Aomami closed her eyes. But why did they have to kill her? She was such a good person. She would never hurt anyone. Why? Because I'm involved in this? If so, wouldn't it have been enough just to destroy me? The man said, they can't destroy you. Why not? Aomami asked. Why can't they destroy me? Because you have long since become a special being. Special being? Aomami asked. In what way special? You will discover that eventually. Eventually? When the time comes. Aomami screwed up her face again. I can't understand what you're saying. You will at some point. So here you have an example of this guy, refusing to answer her questions, and that really helps, for me, it puts me, the reader, in this character's mindset of not understanding what's going on, while also kind of giving that promise that there's more to come here, that the author and that these characters have information that you, the reader, want, but we're not giving it to you, and the characters ride along with you in that struggle. So I think it really helps to draw you in that.
Absolutely.
So it's funny because you guys both brought these up, because the example, or the text that I always point to is the writing fiction by Janet Burroway, and she calls this when your characters are saying no to each other, not literally saying no, but they're saying. So in your example, one character is asking the question and the other one is not answering it.
Right.
And to your point, that draws you in, because now you want these answers and you're not getting them right there with the character.
Exactly.
So that's very effective. And this goes back to the whole thing we've been talking about, is how do you build drama? How do you build tension?
And conflict.
And conflict especially, yes, exactly. And so when your characters don't answer a question, now you've got some conflict, now you have tension, and that's what really works in effective dialogue.
So we've spoken about conflict. I would like to speak a little bit about the way characters say things, which is the tone and the voice that they use. It is not enough to have a kid saying, I want a cookie, and a dad saying, no, you can't have a cookie. One dad that's extremely wealthy and health conscious is going to have a different reason for saying you can't have that cookie than a down and out father who's struggling to make ends meet. So when you are considering why your characters are saying something, that's going to give you insight into who they are, what motivates them, where they come from, what time and place they live in. And that's going to allow your dialogue to do, like we said, double, triple duty.
Right,
at
and
the same time.
It speaks to their station, it speaks to their relationship, it does all of those things where it's giving exposition without explicitly giving it.
Yeah. How do they speak? Is there slang involved? Is there an accent? Is there that's window dressing, and that comes on the top and is super important.
Yeah, and that's an issue that I notice a lot in my own writing, and also just like in critique groups sometimes. You get these passages where writers start, or they kind of stop writing in their character's voice and start writing in their own voice.
Yeah.
And I think that can happen in dialogue a lot, especially when you spend too much time with your protagonist and kind of start to lose track. So I think that window dressing and being intentional about it can really help keep yourself writing in the character's head while still having a believable, run of dialogue.
That's a good point. We talk about that all the time in the group, which is, do your characters speak in different voices?
Right.
Or dialogue will be between two or three people and they all sound the same.
I think you did a good job to circle back to the Secret in the Ice. Like, Renato and Don both have very distinct voices, especially Don at this point. Like, he uses humor in so many different ways. Like, he's totally in denial about a situation,
Right.
and he's this depressed, kind of sad sack
He's a
dude.
little drunk too.
He's a little drunk, and he uses humor as a way of like, as a defense mechanism,
Deflecting.
and also as an offensive weapon to like make his way through the world.
Right, yeah.
And
Wait
so
till you hear the dragon too. She
Whereas Renato's, suave, charming. He knows what's going on. He's got he's holding all the cards, and he comes off that way. He's got a really clear voice.
Right, yeah, and it's funny because in the context of it, they're both kind of isolated in this abandoned submarine base in Greenland, but Renato doesn't care. Like he's sort of like, oh well, isn't this fun, And yeah, whereas Don is on the edge of freaking out. So
Yeah, it's good. It's always good. It's good to know that you're embodying the characters when you're writing it because it definitely comes across.
yeah, no, I could write a whole book. Renato is so much fun to write. I think somebody said like he's your main character. Which I had to then go back and change the whole book. So, okay, this has been the Genre Hustle. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.